Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you very much for coming. This talk is going to be on 3 of Alfresco's core content services. That's Metadata Extraction, Content Transformation, and Renditions. I'll start with a brief introduction if that's okay. So my name is Neil McErlean. I'm one of the lead engineers in Alfresco. I work in the services team. I've been at Alfresco for 4 years. So if I remember correctly, I think I joined during the development of Alfresco 3.2. I've previously worked on a number of parts of the product, most recently the hybrid sync or enterprise sync that was mentioned this morning. That's the feature that allows you to push content from your on-premise repo into Alfresco in the cloud and then make sure that changes on either end are kept in sync. Prior to that, I worked on Alfresco in the cloud, so that was basically porting Alfresco for deployment on AWS. So we added various cloud-specific features and changed the configuration of the product in various ways. And then prior to that, I've worked on the development and maintenance of various services and components within Alfresco, including transformers and extractors, various REST APIs, actions, behaviors, and more stuff. So I'm here for today and tomorrow. I'm happy to talk to anyone either at the office hours or elsewhere about any of those things and more. I'm also an ex-astrophysicist, of which more later, if I get time to do my demo. So this talk is all about content. It's about what data there is in your content, and it's about how Alfresco gets at that data. It's about what Alfresco does with the data once it's taken it out of the content, and the various software components and features that Alfresco uses to do that are all available to you via various APIs. So it's also about how you can use those same features within Alfresco. I should say at the start that this is introductory material, so I'm giving an introductory overview here to these 3 services, and it kind of sets up the following talk where Andy Hunt from Alfresco support will get into much more detail on content transformation specifically, and he'll kind of give you the wisdom of Alfresco's support on how to manage and monitor the performance of your transformations. But here I'm just giving you an introduction to the 3 services, hopefully giving some of you who are new to the platform or who haven't worked on repo side development maybe, giving you an idea of what they're about and how you use them. So breaking it down a bit further, as I say, this is all about content. It's about your content and its metadata, and it's about alternative renditions of your content. I'll be giving overviews of those 3 services. In doing that, we'll look at the Java Foundation APIs for those services. We'll also look at what's available for you via server-side JavaScript and what you can do with those services via JavaScript. And we'll look at how you can configure and extend Alfresco in these areas. I'm going to be showing a number of code samples in this talk. And although I just give you snippets of code ripped out of the middle of methods, I've written them all as JUnit integration tests so that I know that they actually do what they're supposed to do and pass. And those JUnit tests are available for download from the website, devcon.alfresco.com. If you just navigate through the sessions, find my session, you'll see the code samples for download. Okay, so a quick overview of the 3 things we're going to cover. The first is metadata extraction. So there's more to your data than its content. There's more to an image than the simple picture that you see, and there's more to an Office document than just the text within the body of that document. For images, there's the Exif metadata, and that includes information on the camera model that was used to take the picture, the state of the camera when the picture was taken, so was the flash used, what was the ISO speed, and also geographic information, what was the longitude and latitude of the camera when the picture was taken, if your camera supports that. It's less interesting perhaps for documents. They only have things like title, author, and description, and that simple text-based metadata. But you would expect rich media formats like images, videos, audio to contain much richer metadata, which they do, of course. So metadata extraction is about taking that metadata that's buried within your binary content, taking it out and putting it into Alfresco's database tables where it can be reused. The second thing then is content transformation. This is really about the real content. So this is about the picture in the image, and this is about the text within the document itself. And it's really about transforming that content from one MIME type to another. Excuse me. So Alfresco itself has two primary use cases for content transformation. The first is transforming content to images, primarily to produce thumbnails. So when you see the little thumbnail of the front page of your document or a resized image, that was content transformation that produced that. And the other primary use case is for indexing text in support of search. So if Alfresco knows how to transform any piece of content to a plain text version, it will do so, and then that plain text version of the content can be indexed, which is then made available to the Lucene or Solar search subsystems for full text search. So those are Alfresco's two primary use cases in which we use content transformation. It's also generally useful. You can do inter-office transforms, so PDFs of all your Microsoft Office formats and open document formats, and it's a generally useful service. The third one then is the Rendition Service. This is very similar to content transformers, really, but it's a more powerful service and a slightly more general service. So, for example, where content transformations are limited to transforms of the actual content, renditions can do that, but they can include metadata values from your node can be incorporated into the rendition of content. But we'll get into more, we'll see that in detail later. So, keeping it general just for a few more minutes, how do these various components work? The software components within Alfresco that support extraction transformations, how do they work? Well, they work mostly by leveraging existing open source software, mostly Java libraries. Notably Apache Tika. Alfresco makes a lot of use of Apache Tika, which is the Apache library that, that handles things like content-related features. But we also use some external operating system processes. The best example there is probably OpenOffice, or more recently LibreOffice, which is that external process that starts up when Alfresco starts up, hopefully stays alive throughout the lifetime of your server, and then dies when your server dies. That process is a server process, which is available for Alfresco to connect to and ask for Office documents to be transformed. Other OS processes that we have are the ImageMagick and PDF to SWF processes. The first is used for transforming between image formats or resizing images, cropping images, stuff like that. And the second turns PDF content into Flash for rendering in the browser for previews, document previews usually. Those processes, unlike the OpenOffice process, they are kind of on demand. They're started when one of these transformations is required, and they pass or fail and then die. So I want to draw attention to the difference between what we might call heavyweight transformations and lightweight transformations. An example perhaps of a lightweight transformation is zip to text. So there's a transformer that turns archive files, zips, tars, etc., into text, and it doesn't read the content of the entries within the zip file, because that generally would be a very expensive operation. It simply lists the names of the entries within the zip file into a text file, which then Alfresco indexes, and by doing that, it means you can search in Alfresco for an entry within a zip file within your repo, and it will show you the zip file that contains that entry. That's a very lightweight transformation because it doesn't take much work in Java to simply list the entries in a zip file. But there are very heavyweight transformations. OpenOffice is a good example. Some of the in-process stuff with Tika is a very good example. And PDFs are probably the ultimate example. There are some PDF documents, many PDF documents, which are expensive to transform into other formats. So there is a cost associated with this. So those are some general considerations that you need to bear in mind. There's a CPU cost in doing transformations, and there's a memory cost in doing transformations. That cost varies depending on the MIME type. Some MIME types are more difficult than others to transform. It depends on the library that's used to do the transformation. Some libraries are just better written than others. And it depends on the actual document. Some PDF documents are trivially simple, and others are intrinsically very difficult to transform. So all of those things affect the cost that you pay in transforming stuff. Then there's the in-process versus out-of-process consideration. Do you want to pay the CPU cost on the same Tomcat thread that's running your web app? Do you want to push it off into another OS process? Do you want to push it off onto a remote CPU? We're going to cover that, we'll get to that later. And then there's the selection of the notion of a best extractor or transformer. As I say, this talk kind of gives you some context for, or does the introduction really for Andy Hunt's talk, which follows this, and that's an area that he covers in great detail. So I'll kind of name check it, but I won't get into too much detail there. So we better get started, and we'll look at metadata extraction first. Metadata extraction is triggered on content creation or update. So you upload a piece of content into Alfresco, metadata will be extracted for it. Or if you change content in Alfresco. You can also have it done on demand for various reasons. Your own business logic might choose to extract metadata at various times. Alfresco has a metadata extractor registry where various extractors are registered, and each declares which MIME type it is able to extract from. If there will, in general, be more than one extractor for a MIME type, and therefore Alfresco needs to select what it believes to be the best extractor for that MIME type if you ask for one. Once you've got an extractor for the best extractor for your MIME type, that extractor library can then be used to pull out the metadata. And the format of that metadata depends on the extractor library that you're using, but typically it's plain text. Typically it's just key value pairs of plain text. These data then that come from that library are mapped onto the Alfresco content model, and that's where they're stored, essentially in the database tables. So Alfresco has a configurable mapping that turns the key value pairs that the library understands onto the key value pairs in Alfresco's content model, and that mapping is configured in a properties file whose name matches the extractor class that does the work, okay? So looking at that in Java, I hope you can read that at the back, but we have this metadata extractor registry. That's a Spring bean stored in the application context. So we get that from Spring's context. We then need something that gives us access to the content. So we get our content reader from the content service for the node ref whose metadata we want to extract. We then ask the registry for the best available metadata extractor for the MIME type of the piece of content we're interested in. We pre-create a map of property values. These are the key value pairs, and we ask the extractor to extract metadata from that file. You'll see that it passes the reader, so that's what the extractor uses to get at the content, the binary content of your file. It gives it the map to put the result in, and it specifies an overwrite policy. So it's really pretty simple to use. A quick word on the overwrite policy. This only matters when you're re-extracting metadata for a second, third, fourth time, because then there may be values for your metadata already extracted and written into the Alfresco database tables. So what should Alfresco do if new values potentially collide with those existing values? So the first policy is eager. This means basically if what comes out of the content, if what the library tells us the metadata are, as long as those values are not null, write them into the database irrespective of what was there. That would obviously overwrite any values that were there, which is usually what you want because the metadata may have changed within your content. The next one then is prudent. this means that the extracted value must not be null, and that the database property stored within Alfresco either must not exist, or must be null or the empty string. And if those are true, it will be overwritten. And the final one then is cautious, and this means that the extracted value must not be null, and that the existing property must not be defined in Alfresco at all. So that means it will only, well, that's not really an override at all. That means it's just not there. It won't perform any override. I'll give you a look at that properties mapping file. So typically you define the namespaces in Alfresco that your content properties have, and then just a series of maps from the key that the library understands to the key in Alfresco, which is the property name. So here we're mapping author onto Alfresco's CM author property, title onto CM title, and down at the bottom you see mapping of latitude and longitude values from Tika onto Alfresco's latitude and longitude. It's worth pointing out that you need to escape the colons on the first one, but not the second one. So you can map extracted key values onto multiple content properties if you want, or you can choose not to map them at all. So if you don't define a mapping for a key value pair, it will be extracted, but it will just be dropped. It won't be written anywhere. And that happens quite often, that the libraries will support extraction of more metadata than we're interested in, and so we choose to just drop those metadata. A brief look at metadata extraction in JavaScript, server-side JavaScript. You can do it. Alfresco doesn't really have a dedicated JavaScript API either for metadata extraction or for content transformation. But what it does have is the action service and the JavaScript API for actions. So the way to do this is basically to create an action, an extract metadata action, and then execute that action against a given node ref, and that will ensure that the metadata is extracted and written into the database. So it's doable, but this is probably all you'd want, maybe in server-side JavaScript. But there's various things that you can't do here that you can do in the Java variant. You can't get at the metadata extractor registries. That's hidden within Java, and you can't get at the raw properties that were read out of the binary file, which you can in the Java layer. Customization and extension. Probably the easiest way to customize the metadata extractors is to define new mappings. So maybe there's maybe there's metadata that's being read from content files that Alfresco is choosing to drop, and you may be interested in that. By defining new mappings for those values, then they will be stored. You can map those onto existing properties, be they existing properties within Alfresco's content model, or onto a new content model, maybe your own content model, so your own property values. And then the next level of customization or extension is to add your own extractors. The process for doing this typically is to identify some third-party library that knows how to read the binary file that you're interested in, or you can write your own code to do it, which can be a lot of work for some binary file formats. And having done that, you then need to kind of integrate with Alfresco's metadata types. And the two ways of doing that are to extend this abstract mapping metadata extractor class, or to write a Tika plugin. So as I said, Alfresco makes a lot of use of Tika, and you can kind of integrate at the Alfresco level or integrate at the Tika level. Having done that, you've kind of written your code then, you define the metadata mappings that tell Alfresco where to put the metadata. If you're interested in going that way, there's a lot of information on the wiki, and also I would look at the package at the bottom, org alfresco repo content metadata, which shows that's where Alfresco's own metadata extractors are stored. It has many examples of both of those approaches, the Tika and the non-Tika approach, and test code for them. So with a bit of copy and paste, you should be able to knock up a metadata extractor. So recapping, metadata extraction harvests the kind of the hidden data within your binary file and maps it into the content model where it's in Alfresco's database. It's available for reuse in a whole variety of ways. Alfresco has support for many MIME types out of the box. I'd also want to draw attention to metadata insertion. So metadata insertion is coming. Metadata extraction is where you read the metadata that's inside the binary file and put it into Alfresco's database. Once you've done that, if someone chooses to update that metadata, they can only update it in the Alfresco database, and it's not inserted back into the binary file. So at that point, the two views of the metadata on that node are different. So metadata insertion is something that we've talked about for a long time, but it's already implemented. It's on head, but is currently disabled. To be explicit, metadata insertion is when someone does change the metadata in Alfresco, it would then be written back into the binary file so that when you download the file, it would be consistent with what's in Alfresco. Ray Gauss added this, and you can chat to Ray Gauss if you want to hear some more information. I'm sure that will be enabled pretty soon. And as part of that work, Ray also added support for the extraction of tags metadata and mapping those tags from your documents onto Alfresco's taggable aspect. I keep skirting around the whole issue of the selection of the best extractor. I'll deal with that in a minute as part of content transformers because the same question applies there. Okay. So we'll get on to content transformers then. Alfresco has out-of-the-box support for a variety of content transformers. Transformers that deal with text files, HTML and XML files, Microsoft Office formats, both the kind of old style .doc, .ppt, and the new style .docx, .pptx, etc. The various open document formats. Apple's iWorks formats to a limited extent, so Keynote, Pages, and Numbers. Various image transformations, Flash transformations, email transformations, Adobe PDF, Adobe Illustrator, and Photoshop, EPUB, rich text, MP3, and a variety of other audio and video formats, archive formats, zips, tars, etc., and many more. So there's a lot of these things in the product. It's important to say that Alfresco, it doesn't have a graph in the mathematical sense. It doesn't have a graph of paths through the MIME type map. So if you want to transform something from MIME type A to MIME type B, Alfresco will not dynamically create a path from A to B. It needs to have that path explicitly configured. So it's quite dumb in that respect. The way it works is that content transformers are spring beans, and they extend this parent bean type, base content transformer, which ensures that that transformer is registered with the system automatically. Each transformer implements this isTransformable method, which has a from MIME type and a to MIME type, and that basically means the system can query all the transformers and say, I need to go from MIME type A to MIME type B, doc to PDF, say, can you do it? And they'll say, no, I can't do it. No, I can't do it. Yes, I can do it. Each of these transformers can be simple, which just means they go from A to B, doc to PDF, for example. They can be complex, which essentially means they're a chain, so they go from A to B to C, so maybe doc to PDF to an image file. They can be failover transformers, which means there's a sequence of alternative transformations for the same thing. So it could be, in this case, Alfresco will take the first pairing off that sequence and attempt to perform the transformation, doc to PDF, or whatever it is. If that fails, it will move on to the second one in the sequence, and so on till it gets to the end of the sequence. They can be overlapping. So as you saw, they all implement this isTransformable. It's perfectly possible that, and indeed it happens, that multiple transformers will say, yes, I can transform from doc to PDF. So they can overlap. And they can also be dynamically available and unavailable. So a good example of that would be the open office-based transformations. If that process crashes, obviously the transformers that relied upon it are no longer available. I draw your attention to a useful web script that it's useful for developers working in this area, and arguably even admins. You need admin password to call this web script. This MIME types web script. So if you hit that URL on your server, it will show you a view of all the MIME types that are registered with your Alfresco. And then as you kind of click into the links, you can see views of all the metadata extractors that are available for each of those MIME types, and all of the content transformers that are available that both transform to that MIME type and from that MIME type. It reflects the current state of Alfresco when you made the call. So if the OpenOffice process has just crashed, you won't be told about the OpenOffice-based transformers and extractors. If it restarts and you call the same web script, they would appear. So it will depend on the current state of the system. It looks something like this. I realize those of you at the back can't read this, but it's not critical. What this just shows is the name of a MIME type, in this case PPTX. Second line shows you that there's a single extractor for that MIME type. And it shows you the class for that. It's the POI metadata extractor. POI being the Apache library that deals with this MIME type. And then it shows a list of transformers. It can go from PPTX to PDF, old style PowerPoint, open document presentation, etc., etc. And transformable from. So in this case, old style PowerPoint. I've truncated these lists dramatically in order to fit something onto this slide. So in actual fact, there's an awful lot more transformers than that. Okay, as I say, Andy Hunt will talk in some detail about the selection of best transformer, which is exactly the same argument as the selection of best metadata extractor. But I'll briefly say something about it. When you ask for a transformer and there are multiple suitable transformers available, Alfresco prefers an available one, obviously, so it won't give you the OpenOffice-based ones if that's broken. It prefers what we call explicit transformers, and explicit is really a flag on that spring beam that for a particular transformer that says, I'm really good at this particular MIME type pair, so pick me. And it prefers previously fast transformers, but past performance is not necessarily a guide to future performance. So for example, if you have two transformers that will turn a Word document into PDF, and one takes a long time to do that, but produces a really good quality version of your document, and another one does it very quickly, but doesn't. Well, okay. Let's assume you get two versions where the text is accurate, but aesthetically they just don't. One looks better than the other. Alfresco doesn't understand the output quality. Obviously, it can't tell what is a good rendition of a document. All it understands is, did it pass or did it fail? Was it fast or was it slow? And Alfresco will consider the fast one to be better when that is not generally the case. It may be the case. It's not generally true. So when you ask for a transformer, Alfresco will favor transformers that were previously fast. Fast and successful. Fast and failing obviously doesn't count. Okay? What does it look like in Java? It's very similar to the metadata extraction thing. So there's this bean that contains the registry of content transformers in the system. So you get that. You need to get a reader that gives you access to the content. So you get a reader from the content service for the node that you want to transform. When you transform, you have to put your output, your transformed output, into another node. So you get a writer as well. Once you've got a reader and a writer, you're ready to go. You then ask the registry for the best available transformer to take you from, in this case, zip to plain text. There's a number of other parameters that are passed in there, including the size of the source node, the size of its content, which I'll get to in a minute. And then you say transformer.transform, so it will it will either pass or fail, and if it succeeds, it will write the transformed content into that writer, which points at a target node. In JavaScript, it's very similar to metadata extractors. There isn't a dedicated JavaScript API, but you reuse the actions JavaScript API. So this shows the creation of a transform action and then setting various parameters on that transform action. So here we're saying the destination folder is the parent of the source node. So it means put the transformed node in the same place as the source node. We configure the association type and name for the association that will link the transformed node to its containing folder, and we specify the MIME type that we want to transform to. And then you execute the action on that node. It's limited. You can't get at the registry in JavaScript. You can't control which property is used to access the content. It assumes the default CM content property. But if you need that kind of level of access, you have to go for Java. Okay, a quick word on some of the ways you can configure this. Alfresco has this notion of transformation option limits that we added relatively recently. We have the notion of timeouts, size limits, and page limits. So you can configure various timeouts for your transformers. Size limit so that it will filter out source nodes which are too big, or page limit so it can limit the work that it does. These are ways for you to ensure that your system doesn't run away and use too much CPU in handling difficult content. And what you're saying here, so this is an example of a property. This is within repository.properties. It's got a very catchy name, content.transformer.openOffice, MIME type limits, text, PDF, max source kilobytes is 5120, okay? And what that's saying is that for the OpenOffice-based transformers that are transforming text to PDF, if the source file is larger than 5 megabytes, don't even try it, because we've decided that's the limit at which we believe it will be too expensive to perform those transformations, so don't do it. And that's just an example. There's a whole list of those, and you can configure the values of those properties to be whatever you want. We've also added this transformer debug class. Because of the way transformations work, they tend to be run asynchronously. Some of them can be relatively long running. You lose a degree of context in the log, and if something goes wrong, it can be quite difficult to work out what went wrong. So the transformer debug class gives you better logging, essentially. These are things that Andy will talk about following me, so I don't want to go into any more detail than that. If you want to extend the platform in these areas, it's as for metadata extractors. You follow the Alfresco patterns. All our own transformers come with JUnit integration test classes, and they're all contained in that package. If you want to add new transformers, some of the things you need to think about are you need to remember the chains. So Alfresco is dumb in that graph of MIME types. If you want to transform from MIME type A to B to C, you need to remember to explicitly declare that path. You also need to remember subsystems. So Alfresco has it puts some of its Spring Beans into subsystems in order to better support runtime configurability of those parts of the product. ImageMagick and OpenOffice are like that. And what that essentially means is that the beans for those transformers are in different context files. And if you want to integrate with those, you need to remember them. And likewise, the enterprise variants, things like JOD converter, which is the alternative access point to OpenOffice, those are in their own context files. So if you want to integrate with those, you need to remember those various Spring files. So a quick recap. There are many transformations, many paths through the MIME type graph are supported, but Alfresco doesn't have that graph. It's all explicitly hard-coded and declared. Transformations can be very expensive in CPU and memory for some content. And I think I may have said this earlier, but I'll be explicit about it. Transformation to text means free indexing. I said this about the zip transformer. If you provide a transformer that can turn your content into plain text, or if there is one in the system, that means Alfresco will discover it and it will index that content, and you get free full text search for that content. There's no link between the source node and the transformed node. So although one is derived from the other, Alfresco maintains no relationship between those. So thumbnails, for example, are pieces of content transformed, and Alfresco has quite a lot of bespoke code to make that link so that when the source node changes, the thumbnail updates. But that has to be written because the transformation service doesn't provide that. And that is something that Renditions adds, which we'll get onto now. So renditions are a more general feature than transformers, but they do have a strong overlap. Thumbnails are renditions, and the previews that you see, the kind of in-browser, full-screen, Flash-based previews of content, those are renditions as well. But not all renditions are thumbnails or previews. So they're more general than that. Renditions can have a flexible location, so they can be stored as direct children of the source node, which should be quite common. That's what we do with thumbnails. Or they can be put off in some other folder. But irrespective of where you choose to put the rendition node, Alfresco will maintain an association to its source node. So without you having to do anything, Alfresco will ensure that changes to the source node mean that all the renditions for that node will be updated. Something that was added recently for records management is the notion of preventing renditions for some nodes. So there are some types of records where you really want to lock down that content, and you need to know exactly where that content goes. And as part of that, you need to prevent all renditions of that content. So we've added this prevent renditions marker aspect. If you stamp that aspect on a node, no renditions for that node will be created. But it's configurable, so you can configure the Alfresco type, or the list of types that are unrenditionable, can be configured within Spring config. And as I said, renditions can reflect the content of their source node, but can also reflect the metadata of that source node. They're based on rendition engines. Sorry, yeah, a question? Yeah, it will say this content cannot be previewed. Yeah. So the renditions are produced with engines, basically the classes that do the work. And there's various types of those. Reformat is just a content transformation. It means just turn it from one type to another. So that will redirect to the existing content transformers. Image is a rendition engine that deals with image manipulation. So it has various parameters for image manipulation. FreeMarker is a rendition engine that allows you to run a FreeMarker template against your source content to produce a rendition. And XSLT is the XSL variant of that, although obviously your source node needs to have XML content in that case. And finally, we've got composite renditions, which are really a series. So reformat this node, turn it from doc to an image, and then crop that image in some way. The way it works is with rendition definitions. So you have to create a rendition definition. This is like a recipe or a configuration of the work you want to do. You set various parameter values on it, and then you execute that rendition definition against your node. And those definitions can be persisted, which is useful if they're very complex or if commonly used. So you can save them into Alfresco's data dictionary. I'm getting my 5-minute warning now, so I have to accelerate a little bit. I apologize. A brief look at what renditions are like when used from Java. You create, they're all named, so you need to create this queue name for the rendition. You need to create the rendition definition. Here we're using the image rendering engine. You set parameter values on it, so resize width, resize height, etc., and then you just say render this node. JavaScript for renditions is different to the previous two examples. There is a dedicated JavaScript API for renditions, and it looks very like the Java API. So you create the rendition definition, you set parameter values on it, and you call render. You can see here that some of the parameter values that you can set are interesting. There's the destination path template. So here we're saying put the rendition in /company home /cropped images $brace name, which means use the name of the source node as the name of your rendition node. And there's various other examples of templated path elements like that. So to recap, I really didn't do justice to renditions. They are like transformations plus plus. They're certainly more complex, and if all you want to do are transformations, I don't think I'd bother with renditions, really. But they're much more powerful. You can do much more powerful things with renditions. So that concludes the slides, and I'll finish with a quick demo if that's okay. I wanted to add a new metadata extractor and a new content transformer to Alfresco for a MIME type that Alfresco knows nothing about. And so as I said, I used to be an astronomer, and in astronomy there's a file format called FITS, and it really doesn't matter what it is. It's an image. You can think of it as like a scientific JPEG, right? It's got some image data in it and an awful lot of metadata. And obviously Alfresco doesn't know anything about FITS files. So I've got an Alfresco server running here on my laptop, which has been configured with a basic understanding of FITS files. So I've added support for metadata extraction. I've added a transformer that will allow me to transform the image within that FITS file. And I've added various pieces of configuration in share so that those data are visible, notably the property values that get extracted. So I'll switch over to my other view. Hang on, I need to turn on mirroring. Okay. Okay, so we create a site. We log in and create a site. We go into the document library for that site, and we drop in some content. So here I have a FITS file. There's an 11, this is quite small, an 11 megabyte file. You just drop this into Alfresco. At this point, Alfresco will have realized that it does have a metadata extractor for this file type, so it will have extracted its metadata. We say OK. It will now be trying to create a thumbnail for that image. But if we take a look at the properties for this file, oh, well, there you go. So it's produced a kind of a full screen preview, which doesn't look anywhere near as nice as the previous image I showed, but that's because it's real scientific data, not pretty pictures, and real scientific data isn't pretty. But if we look, let me see, where am I going? Edit properties. No, I don't want to do that. Hang on. I just want to see the properties. So if we scroll down to the properties, there's all the usual stuff, the name, title, description. But at the bottom, 3 extra ones that I've chosen to extract. So there's the date, which is the date the image was taken, the exposure time, and the telescope that was used to take that image. So this was taken by the UK Schmidt telescope. Okay, so what? And then if we go back to the document library, we've got a transformation. So that's 2 transformations of this node, the kind of full screen, or the large in-browser preview and the smaller thumbnail. Okay, so the code that was required to do this is available, and there really wasn't too much work in it. So I'll leave it there. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them on. Have you got a microphone? Okay, sorry, we don't have a microphone. You'll have to shout. I'll repeat the question.
So from a semantic standpoint, the difference between a content transformation and a rendition is content transformation. Does the rendition have the extra parameters for output paths, and the content transformation is primarily used internally?
Content transformations are much more specific. They're only about content. They're only about turning it to one from MIME type A to MIME type B. Renditions have support for, they basically use other types of data to produce the output, and in selecting what data was used, we tried to add support for some of the things that that are typically used in web content management. So some of the old AVM things, I think. So yeah, so it's broader. It's got a richer set of parameters that you can use. Yeah.
Well, how would you actually use content transformation aside from index? You said the preview is itself an addition. Like, what are the other applications of content transformation?
Well, it's yeah. Well, thumbnails and indexing is where we use them, but you could. It's basically up to you where you want to turn. Why you want to transform from one MIME type to another. You could, for example, have a folder in Alfresco which had rules on the folder, and every time someone added a new piece of content to that folder, if it was of a certain MIME type, then you would run transformers and put the transformed node somewhere else. So you could say, every time someone adds an Office document to this folder, then turn it into a PDF and put it in another folder. And that other folder might be accessible by, there might be read-only access for other users to that folder, say. So it's a kind of a fundamental service that could be reused in various business ways, but that's up to you, really. Yeah?
I was wondering, what if you have a scenario where you have multiple content, which is treated as a package and transferred and senior content?
Okay, so the question is, we have multiple nodes, yeah? So multiple pieces of content on Alfresco, and how can you transform that to a single node?
Yes, what that was used as a package.
Right, so the input is like a package of content that is transformed in some way to produce a single output. The renditions don't support the production of kind of many-to-one or one-to-many renditions as you described. But it is something that we're looking at. There's a number of improvements being made in this area that are being driven by Ray Gauss and his digital asset management use cases that are looking at, like for example, an example of the other way, like a single to many, would be you have a video file and you want to produce a series of thumbnails of that video file at various, like every 10 seconds within the video file. So that's a single source generating multiple output renditions. That's something that we're looking at. I don't believe the product has it today, and I don't believe we currently have the kind of fan-in many-to-one either. But if it comes soon, it will be driven by Ray Gauss and the digital asset management use cases that we have. I would talk to product management about that if that's something that you need. And Mike Farman, who's here, is the product manager with responsibility for kind of general document management, which is where that falls. So I would talk to Mike Farman and ask him what his plans are and let him know what you need. Yeah?
I've been playing with importing data using a few other, CMIS and FTP, and I've noticed that the metadata extraction, at least the TICA stuff, doesn't always seem to fire in every interface. And one of the comments I got on the forum was sort of like, it's probably hard-coded into this or that or the other area. So I'm just wondering if you know anything about that, or if there's any. I've been forced, for example, I'm doing an import process using CMIS to import into it. I have to actually follow up with a call to the extract metadata action in order to get it to extract the metadata.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so there's a behavior in Alfresco that when content changes, it always reruns metadata extraction. I think you're right. It may be that when you upload content, that it's the share application that asks Alfresco to extract the metadata, rather than using an onCreate behavior, which would mean all APIs would get that extraction. Yeah,
Probably through share. Is that why I'm not seeing
that may be the case. I'll find out. I'll have a chat to a few people and.
I mean, I worked around it with the call. Just
yeah.
It's a little funky to have to call that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Follow up real quick. Exif. How is Exif extracted? Because I've also noticed that if I run my AMP project through Maven, I develop through Maven, that Exif is not being extracted. Only when I run it against an actual repo installation am I getting Exif out. I was looking to see why. Do you have any idea what is it using to extract Exif? Is it a Java app? Or?
It is a Java app, so it uses Tika, and Tika is that umbrella project that contains various other sub-projects. It uses a library developed by a guy called Drew Noakes, which is not under active development anymore, but it's incorporated into Tika. It's a Java library that just reads the file, so it doesn't do anything special or anything unusual. Yeah, I'm not sure why that would happen, but thank you. Okay, yeah, it's probably time to wrap up. My name's on the list on Engineering Hours, so if you want to have a kind of follow-on discussion on this or anything else, stick your name down and I'll chat to you later. Thank you very much, everyone.